Okay, so welcome to the first lecture for Bio 201, Human Anatomy and Physiology. This is the first semester of the two-semester series for biology majors. If you have not watched my orientation, please stop this video and go ahead and go back and watch the orientation video. For those of you that attended live or already watched the video, you're set to go. But that orientation video is very important for getting you started on the right track. And again, I gave you some tips and tools on how to be most successful in this course. Because again, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. This is an 8-week course and it is intense. So I want you to be prepared and I want you to be successful, but I want to let you know kind of exactly what you're getting into. So again, my name is Ch1 Pt1 and I am your lecture instructor. And we're going to dive right into this first chapter, chapter 1. Again, if you took this as a 16-week course, I have a longer version of this lecture. I did leave that posted for you if you would like, broken up into 2 parts. If you need more of a detailed review on this, but for most of you, I think you're just needing a quick review of this information because you just took Bio 181. So we're going to go ahead and just cruise right into this. So this is just an introduction to the human body and a lot of kind of review stuff from kind of, some of this cellular biology stuff. So again, the purpose of this chapter is just really to introduce anatomy and physiology, what they are, talk about how living things are organized, what is considered a living thing, what properties do all these living things share, and how do we fit into that. And then, of course, learning and understanding the very last part, our anatomical terminology. And then you're going to see that we're going to talk a lot about homeostasis, so please pay attention when we get to the slides on homeostasis because that is a major theme in every single chapter of the book. Not just here in 201, but in 202 as well. All right, so let's get into this. Many of you probably already know that anatomy is actually the study of the structures of the body parts and their kind of relationship with one another. And then physiology is the study of the function of those body parts, how they work and how they carry out all of these wonderful life-sustaining activities that we need to be able to function. Now, of course, as you can probably guess, you can't really talk about structure without talking about function. So we talk about this complementarity of structure and function. And again, that's because really function is in a lot of ways reflected in structure. So you look at something like the intestinal villi, okay? And they're going to be these little finger-like structures. And you're going to be like, well, why do we have these intestinal villi? And if you think about it, the main goal of the intestine is to absorb nutrients, right? So of course, these intestinal villi, the structure of them makes absolute sense because you're maximizing your surface area for absorption here. So again, function and structure oftentimes go hand in hand. And so again, we call this that principle of complementarity. You don't really have to know that as a principle, but you do need to know that structure and function go together, okay? So again, it's really hard to just talk about structure. A lot of times people think that Bio 201 is anatomy and Bio 202 is your physiology, and that's not the case because again, they go hand in hand. So with each system that we go through, we're going to talk about both the anatomy and the physiology, okay? Because again, that structure and function go hand in hand. Now, when we talk about the kind of overall organization, right? The structural organization of the human body, we're going to go from the smallest chemical level all the way up onto the big whole organism. And so many of you have done this again in Bio 181. You've probably done it in your Bio 100 courses, even in your high school biology courses, where you start again at the chemical level, right? We start at the level of atoms. And then you can put those atoms together to make molecules and compounds. And then you're going to put those together, okay, to make our organelles. Organelles are basically an organ of the cell. Lo and behold, beautiful. It fits, right? I like when the names actually kind of fit what it does. So it's an organ of the cell, organelle. Okay, so this is going to be things like mitochondria. This is going to be things like your endoplasmic reticulum and your, smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So all of those Golgi apparatus, those are going to be your organelles of the cell. Okay, so when you put all of those organelles together inside a cell, then you are at the cellular level. Okay, so a cellular level is when you're looking at, again, a single cell. That's your basic structural and functional unit of life, or of any organism, including us. Okay, is that cell. So then when we put cells together, groups of similar cells in a similar area working together, we call that a tissue. Okay, so tissue, then you're at the tissue level of organization, which you're going to get into in lab really quickly when you get into the histology. Then when you put two or more types of tissues together, right, functioning, again, for a common purpose, then you're going to be at the organ level of organization. And then when you put multiple organs together, okay, then those multiple organs are going to work together to form an organ system. So, something like that digestive system, right? So your digestive system consists of, not only the stomach, but also the intestines, the small intestines, the large intestines. It's going to include the pancreas and liver. So again, organ systems are going to be all of these organs that work together for the function of that system. And then, of course, the organismal level is just all organ systems combined together to make up that whole organism, okay? And so here's my lovely chart for this. Atoms make up molecules. We put the molecules together to make up organelles, organelles to make up a cell, and then tissue. And then, of course, the tissues together make up organs. Organs together make up organ systems. And then eventually the organismal level. I just thought that baby was cuter, so I stuck that in there for you. Now, when we study anatomy and physiology, there are some kind of clinical applications that we can use in terms of these techniques that we can use to study the body. And you can use these, again, as we go through human anatomy and physiology together. So there are kind of three non-invasive techniques that we can use. One's palpation, where you're literally just feeling the body surfaces with the hands. And I'm going to ask you to do this a lot when you're going through, you'll do this a lot in lab when you're going through the skeleton, okay? Because it's easier if you can palpate and feel these kind of, some of these bones and their, certain features on yourself. You're much more likely to remember it. Auscultation means you're just listening to body sounds to kind of evaluate what their function is. So again, you can auscultate your heartbeat, right? So that way then you can, again, kind of evaluate its function. And then percussion is where you're tapping on body surfaces and listening. So, if you tap on a surface, is it hollow underneath? Is it not? Can you hear fluid in there? So that would be what percussion is. So we'll use some of those throughout 201 and especially into 202 to study the human body. Now, getting back to, again, kind of life at the cellular level, we're going to talk really quickly about what is life. And for those of you that know the whole Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart court case, it had to do with a pornography court case that he had to decide on. And he, of course, used this statement, I know it when I see it. He said, oh, that was not pornography because I know it when I see it. And so just like it didn't work out for Justice Potter Stewart, if you don't know the story, you can go look it up. It's kind of a funny story. Well, not so funny for Justice Potter Stewart, but you can see why, again, I know it when I see it is not an appropriate response for our answer or our question, what is life? So again, it wasn't appropriate for Justice Potter Stewart, and for us, not appropriate as well. So we have to give these, we have to give some actual characteristics that we should associate with this term life, okay? So the requirements for life, again, for any life, including us, because we are, again, a living organism, are that we have to maintain boundaries. So I'm just going to go through each one of these. So again, maintaining boundaries is easily done for us by separating between the separations between the internal and external environments, right? So for us, our skin really helps to separate us from the external environment. And then each of our individual cells are also separated from their external environments with plasma membranes, okay? So maintaining boundaries, that's a major function of life. movement as well. So again, our muscular system obviously is going to, musculoskeletal system is going to allow us to move, okay? But again, there are other things like, again, cardiac muscle it has to be able to move our blood throughout our body, right? So there's smooth muscle that's gonna be able to move food through the digestive tract. So you can consider movement in a lot of different ways inside the body. And then if you're talking about movement at the cellular level, we call this contractility. Not as important that you know that, but again, I put it in there, but really important that you know that movement, again, is a major function of life. Responsiveness. So you have to have this ability to sense your external environment and be able to respond to any of those external stimuli. So again, we're going to talk about this withdrawal reflex at the very end of the semester that helps prevent our injury to ourselves. Again, we're able to control our breathing rate in response to some activities that we need to do, right? Outside responding to the external environment. Let's say you're being chased by a scary bear, right? You really, really need to increase your breathing rate to provide enough oxygen to all your tissues to be able to run away from the scary bear. So again, responsiveness is an important necessary function of life. Digestion, of course, we need to be able to break down that food that we bring in and, again, break it down into the appropriate nutrients, absorb those nutrients, those simple molecules into the bloodstream, and then bring those to all of the cells throughout the body. So important function, again, for life, for us, not just for us, but for all living organisms. Metabolism. So metabolism is going to be very different in human anatomy and physiology than it is going to be in the kind of general world out there. We talk about metabolism as like a kind of like, oh, you know, you have a good metabolism, you have a bad metabolism. So again, we're not, in terms of biology and anatomy, we think of metabolism as very functional. And that is that the metabolism simply means all of the chemical reactions. It's the sum total of all of the chemical reactions that occur in your body cells. So both the breakdown and the building reactions. That's what metabolism is. So again, you're going to learn this term in the next lecture, chapter 2. Some of all the catabolic reactions are our breakdown reactions and our anabolic or building reactions, okay? That's what metabolism is. So I want you to really keep that in mind when we use the term metabolism. We're talking about, again, the sum total of these breakdown and building reactions. Excretion, of course, we're just getting rid of waste, right? We have to be able to get rid of these waste products so they don't build up and they don't become toxic to us. So when we break down proteins, we're going to produce urea as a byproduct, and we're going to need to excrete that urea. Same with, again, any of the metabolic reactions where we're, again, going to be producing energy. We are going to produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct from those metabolic processes, and that carbon dioxide needs to be excreted so it does not build up in our system, okay? I shouldn't say as we make energy, but as we use that energy. So as we use that energy, we're going to produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct, okay? Again, of course, unabsorbed food, feces, we got to get rid of that. So again, removal of those wastes is really important. Of course, reproduction is important, not only at the organismal level where we are producing offspring, right? But it's also important at the cellular level. So again, when we do things like mitosis, right? Division of our cells for growth and repair, that's really important. So again, reproduction at the cellular level as well as the organismal level. And then growth, we got to increase in size. So again, that's another important necessary function of life. So keep in mind that, again, we being human beings are a large multicellular organism. So to function, again, our individual cells have to be able to keep us alive. And these organ systems that we have that we're going to talk about are all designed to service these cells and keep these cells going. So all of the cells in our body depend on organ systems to keep them alive, okay? And there are 11 major organ systems that work together to maintain life. These are the organ systems that you just need to know really at the basic level right now. And then, of course, we're going to go into detail on each one of these organ systems. We'll do half of them in 201, half of them in 202, okay? So here are the 11 organ systems. And this is just showing you an example of kind of the interrelationships among body organs. You guys probably already know this. Things like we're bringing in oxygen through the respiratory system, and then into the bloodstream, and that oxygen is distributed through the cardiovascular system. So again, you probably already know that, but you can read through this. It's just kind of interesting if you want to read through the interrelationships of these body organ systems. So of course, as we talk about these body organ systems, keep in mind that, we're going to break them down to each organ systems, but they're all interrelated and working together in terms of our ability to function as a human being. So let's talk about these 11 organ systems that keep all of our cells alive. So the first one is the integumentary system, and that's the first system that we're going to get into as well. This forms our external body covering, again, our skin, and helps protect our deeper tissues from injury. That's kind of its major function, right? Its major function is, again, providing this barrier from the external environment here. And then we'll get into this more in the lecture, so you don't necessarily have to know this now, but it synthesizes vitamin D. It's going to house certain receptors like pain receptors, pressure receptors, and then it's also going to house all kinds of things like sweat and oil glands, production, our hair follicles to produce hair. Again, our nails are part of the integumentary system, so we'll get into that. And then the next system we'll get into will be the skeletal system. And this is going to provide the structural support, right, for the body, especially supporting our body organs. So this is going to protect and support our body organs. It's going to provide the actual structural framework for muscles to cause movement of our body parts. And then it's going to have this other function that we'll talk about, where blood cell production is going to happen actually inside the bones. And then the bones are actually really important for storing minerals like calcium. And we'll talk about that when we get into the skeletal system and why that's important. The muscular system, again, is of course going to allow us to manipulate our environment with movement, with locomotion, okay? It's also going to allow us to do things like facial expression, maintain posture. And when our muscles contract, they produce heat as a byproduct. So it also helps us to produce heat. Our nervous system, which will be the last system that we will be getting into in 201, is our fast-acting control system of the body, right? It's our first kind of main control system of the body. It's going to respond to our stimuli, internal and external stimuli, changes that are going on, and then provide the appropriate response, okay, by activating either muscles or certain glands. And so, of course, that's going to include your brain and your spinal cord and all your nerves, okay? If I didn't include the things that are going to be included in that system. Now, in 202, you're going to get into the endocrine system, which has to do with your glands that are going to secrete hormones, okay? And so we'll kind of talk about what technically hormones are, these chemical signals that are going to travel through the bloodstream, and it's going to be one of your major control systems as well. So the nervous system and the endocrine system, again, are going to be kind of your major control systems. The cardiovascular system, as you can guess, again, is going to consist of things like your heart and your blood vessels. And this is going to transport blood and carry oxygen throughout the body, nutrients throughout the body. It's going to get rid of wastes, things like carbon dioxide, and expel those wastes, help move those wastes to the right organ where they can expel it. So again, and then our heart, of course, is going to pump the blood. And then the lymphatic system and the immune system, again, go hand in hand. The lymphatic system is going to pick up fluid, the excess fluid in your tissues, okay, that was leaked from your blood vessels, and return it back to the venous system, okay? And as it does that, it's going to move through things like lymph nodes and all that, where you can do some immune surveillance. So it's going to house things like our white blood cells that are involved in immunity. And again, that will help us to mount that attack from the immune system, the immune response. And we'll talk again about how that happens with the different types of white blood cells and things like that. Again, you get into that in 202. Of course, respiratory system, again, is going to include all of those passages like the nasal cavity, the pharynx, larynx, that you're going to bring air in and then into the bronchi and then eventually into the lungs, okay? And so again, you don't need to know these parts yet to the respiratory system because you're going to get into them in 202. So I'm just kind of doing a really quick introduction. But the main purpose of the respiratory system is, of course, again, to bring in oxygen and remove carbon dioxide into the blood. Okay, right? So that's your main function, is gas exchange. Digestive system, again, is just bringing in nutrients, breaking that food down into the kind of absorbable units, the absorbable nutrients that can then enter the bloodstream and again be carried to all of the cells in your body. So again, the digestive system is really about breaking down and absorbing those nutrients. Okay, and then of course getting rid of the waste, the indigestible stuff that you can't process, and that's eliminated as feces. And then urinary system is eliminating nitrogenous waste from the bottom, from the body, sorry, not from the bottom, from the body. And we do that because, again, as we break down proteins, we can end up building up urea, and that can be a toxic byproduct. So what we do is we, again, expel that. Also, it helps us to regulate water. You'll see there's a really important portion of your urinary system is to really help control electrolytes, also acid-base balance of the blood. So you'll get into all that in 202. And then, of course, the reproductive system, our main function here with the reproductive system, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritties on this, but is, of course, to produce gametes. So you're going to talk about, when you get there, the process of meiosis, to kind of have your genetic information to produce your gametes, and then, of course, to produce offspring, right? And then in females, then to also, nourish the newborns or nourish that offspring. So again, those are the kind of main functions of the reproductive system. We're not going to get into anything more than that. Of course, again, our survival needs. So as humans, we have a few factors that are, again, key for our survival, and too much or too little of these survival needs can be harmful. So we're going to talk about something called homeostasis and how we kind of maintain these levels. So again, for survival, we need nutrients, of course, to survive. We need oxygen to survive, and we'll talk about that in terms of especially our energy production. And then water, we need water to survive. We need to be able to maintain a normal body temperature, and we also need to be able to maintain kind of an appropriate atmospheric pressure within the body. So we'll talk about all of those things. This one you're going to talk mostly about in 202, but we'll talk about some of these things today in terms of talking about homeostasis. Okay, so sorry, I know I'm going through this really quickly, but hopefully this is pretty basic. Like, obviously, one, we need nutrients because, again, we need certain chemicals for our cells just to be able to function, to make energy. So again, this is going to we're going to talk about this in the chemistry lecture in the form of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and then we'll talk a little bit about minerals and vitamins as well. Okay, that are important for that. So those are all important chemicals, again, for producing energy and being able to use that energy and then building the cells. And then oxygen, of course, we need oxygen. It's essential for the release of energy from our foods. And so to be able to take that food energy and produce ATP out of it, which is the, remember, usable form of energy for the cells. That's the kind of energy currency for the cells. To do that, we need oxygen for that byproduct. If you guys remember that whole lovely Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, again, oxygen is needed for that. So we're not going to go over that this semester. You're like, phew, because, right, that's a whole process. But you do need to know that oxygen is required for that process to occur for us to make energy in the form that our cells can use. Okay, so the body can survive only a few minutes without oxygen because without that oxygen, we can't make energy for the brain to function. And that is really bad, right? So we need oxygen. Water, again, is our most abundant chemical in the body. Again, we're mostly bags of water, right? And so it provides that watery environment that we need for all of the chemical reactions that happen in our body, okay? So again, and this fluid base is also the base for secretions and excretions that we'll talk about. Normal body temperature. So we have this, again, homeostatic level. I'm going to introduce that word, this level of body temperature that we like to maintain. And that's because that is the ideal temperature that our chemical reactions function at, meaning our chemical reactions work best at this body temperature. So if the body temperature falls below or goes above 37 degrees Celsius, our chemical reactions are affected. They can either go too fast or too slow. And so again, that's why we have all of these processes that we're going to talk about in just a minute that help us to maintain a normal body temperature. And then appropriate atmospheric pressure. Again, specific pressure of air is needed for us to be able to breathe. And you're going to talk a lot about that difference in pressure when you get to the respiratory system in 202 for us to be able to do gas exchange in the lungs. So that atmospheric pressure is really important for us to actually bring in that oxygen, right, into the lungs and then into our bloodstream. And if we're not able to do that, then of course, you know, that could be very detrimental because we can't get oxygen again to our tissues. So let's talk about this thing that I keep talking about, homeostasis. Hopefully you kind of already heard this. Remember, the term homo means same. Okay, so hetero means different, and homo is going to mean same. That's just our prefix, right? And stasis means the state of. So literally, homeostasis means the state of sameness. And so this is our ability to maintain a stable internal environment. Remember, the reason that we like to maintain this internal stable environment, I mean, with a lot of things. So it's not just with body temperature, but it's our glucose levels and our pH. And the reason is that, again, that state of sameness, that homeostatic level for each of these different characteristics is ideal for the function of what we're going to talk about are enzymes that control all of those reactions, all of those metabolic reactions, okay? So our body likes these, you know, these different areas, again, glucose levels, temperature, pH, to be the same because it is the ideal level for the function of all of these metabolic reactions, okay? So we need this state of sameness for our metabolic reactions to happen the way that we need them to do. So I like to think of this as kind of, you know, you're standing on a seesaw, okay? And so here would be your homeostasis. And anytime that we veer from homeostasis, you're going to see that our body will do things to try to get us back to, mostly our organ systems will do things to bring us back to homeostasis. So again, homeostasis is this kind of balancing act. And different environmental stimuli and things can throw our homeostasis out of whack, and our organ systems are going to try to get us back. Now, if our organ systems are not able to restore balance, this can eventually lead to death, okay? So again, homeostasis is that important. So let's talk about some of these homeostatic controls. When we talk about, again, regulating homeostasis, our two major systems for regulating homeostasis are going to be the nervous system and the endocrine system. So these are our major regulatory systems. And they are really going to play a major, major role in helping regulate and maintain homeostasis in the body. Okay, so you'll see that is going to be a major theme throughout human anatomy and physiology. Okay, and there are lots of variables, lots of factors that our body is trying to control. It tries to maintain homeostasis for blood sugar, for body temperature, for blood volume, pH. There are lots and lots of things. And each organ system, we're going to talk about that organ system and what homeostatic factors it's trying to maintain the same. Okay? So when we talk about how we control homeostasis, okay, we have these different components of what we call our homeostatic control for each of the variables, okay? We're gonna have some type of receptor that is detecting any changes in these variables, whether it be it's detecting a change in blood sugar or body temperature. And then that receptor is gonna send information back to the control center, and that control center is gonna say, okay, well, there was a change, okay? So now we need to send a message to bring us back up to homeostasis. So it'll send out that message to some type of effector, and then that effector can then help to bring you back to homeostasis, okay? So these three major homeostatic controls are, we need to have a receptor, okay, a sensor receptor that's going to monitor the environment and respond to, again, some type of stimuli, okay? So something that can cause a change in that variable. And then the second thing is we have a control center. Again, that control center is going to determine what our set point is for that specific variable, okay? What our state of sameness needs to be. And then it's going to receive input from the receptor, and then it's going to determine what the appropriate response will need to be to bring us back up to homeostasis, okay? So pretty easy so far, right? And then our effector is going to receive output from that control center, and it's going to provide the appropriate response, okay, to either bring us back to homeostasis, we'll talk about that as a negative feedback mechanism, or enhance the original stimulus, which is more unusual, and we'll talk about that as a positive feedback system. But most of the time, we're trying to get back to homeostasis. So our negative feedback mechanism is going to be the big one, okay? So you can think of this again as just like if you were controlling the temperature of a room. Again, your control center here would be your switch, or your thermostat if you were controlling, again, the temperature of the room. And again, you'd have some type of receptor that was, detecting what the temperature of the room is, and then that would send information back. And then again, that control center would decide what your response is. Do you need to turn on the heat? Do you need to cool it down with air conditioning? So again, that would be then your effector. So this is just a very simple, basic example. I like the examples that are more appropriate to human anatomy and physiology. And so I thought I had some in here. Most of them are negative feedback mechanisms. So again, like I said, it's just this kind of balancing act. And so let me go through some examples. I think it's easier just to go through some examples. Now, really quick, I need to talk about the two different types of feedback systems. Again, the majority of the systems in our body are going to be what's called a negative feedback mechanism. And I want you to put next to this negative feedback system, i.e. maintain homeostasis. Because this is where our negative feedback system is where we're going to have a response that's going to bring us back to homeostasis. So let's say again, we have an original stimulus, okay, that brings us away from homeostasis. Maybe it tilts the seesaw down, okay? A negative feedback system would mean that we would have a response that reverses that stimulus and brings the seesaw back up, right, to homeostasis, okay? So that's how most systems are going to work. The majority, there's very few systems where we have positive feedback systems, okay? So most of them are going to be negative feedback systems, but it is important that you understand what a negative feedback system is. Now, if a response enhances the original stimulus, so again, the original stimulus brings the seesaw down, and then the response is to push the seesaw down even farther, that's a positive feedback system. And there are very few examples in the human body of positive feedback systems. Childbirth is one. We're going to talk about the platelet plug formation is another one. Okay. So again, most feedback systems are negative feedback systems. So again, there are lots of different examples in the body, like regulating body temperature. Okay. So here's your seesaw, right? So if you have a stimulus that increases your body temperature, you are exercising and your muscles are contracting and you produce lots of heat, your body temperature raises. You have, again, receptors in your body that are detecting that rise in temperature. So those receptors then are going to send that information. Again, we have these things in like the skin. And they're going to send that information back to the brain, your control center, okay, and to the actual thermoregulatory center in your brain. We'll talk about that eventually, especially the hypothalamus. And then, again, you don't need to know that now. We're just going through receptors, control center. Then the control center, brain, is going to decide what response is going to occur. So in this case, if it's a negative feedback mechanism, we're going to bring that seesaw back to balance. We want to bring that body temperature back down. And so it's going to do that, again, by the nervous system going out and sending that information to the effectors, the sweat glands, to produce sweat to do evaporative cooling, okay? As we do that evaporative cooling, it wicks away, again, that excess heat, and it brings us back to homeostasis. Now, if the seesaw tips in the other direction, right, and the stimulus is that our body gets cold, okay, so the receptors are going to detect that in our skin, send that information back to the thermoregulatory center in the brain, and then the brain's going to go, okay, well, we need to warm up the body. All right, skeletal muscles, okay, you're our effector. You're going to start to do these short contractions to generate heat, and that's what really shivering is, right? Shivering is our skeletal muscles doing these contractions, and it's producing heat as a byproduct. And that helps to raise our body temperature back up again to homeostasis. So again, this is what a negative feedback mechanism is. Negative feedback brings us back to homeostasis, okay? I can't emphasize that enough. Again, here's one with just, you'll get into this in 202, but if you eat a hamburger and your blood glucose levels rise, your pancreas is going to release insulin, and that insulin is going to help pull out that glucose out of the blood and store it in things like the liver in the form of glycogen, so that your blood glucose levels can get back to their homeostatic level. Okay? So again, just another example of a negative feedback mechanism. Again, bringing us back to homeostasis, always back to that even state on the seesaw. So again, there's lots of examples of negative feedback. Again, this is what we just talked about. Receptors sense increased blood glucose levels. The pancreas control center secretes insulin into the blood, and then insulin causes the body cells, the effectors, to absorb more glucose, especially in the liver, which decreases your overall blood glucose. Okay? So that's just, again, very simple. And the easy thing is, any example that you get, guys, and you are not sure whether or not it's negative feedback or positive feedback, just ask yourself, are you getting back to that original state of sameness? If you are, it's negative feedback. Now, it's positive feedback if that response enhances or exaggerates that original stimulus. So meaning if you, again, and this is where I wish my pen was a little bit easier to write with here, but if for some reason, okay, you have that seesaw, and if for some reason, again, that stimulus throws that seesaw off, okay, in this direction, then positive feedback would be that, again, that response to that change would take you even further in that same direction. So the response is going to take you even further this way, even farther away from homeostasis. So positive feedback is very rare because it's going to bring us farther away from homeostasis, okay? So the response enhances or exaggerates that original stimulus, okay? Brings us farther away from homeostasis. And so usually this exhibits like a cascading, or what we say, an amplifying effect of the feedback, again, kind of propelling itself forward even farther and farther and farther away from homeostasis. And a really good example of this is both labor contractions and platelet plug formation. So let me turn this off for a second. And we're going to get to labor contractions. So, this makes sense, right? When you think about labor, because obviously you want to get away. If you're pregnant, if you've ever been pregnant, I can vouch for this. You don't want to be pregnant forever. So you don't want pregnancy to be your state of sameness, right? So eventually you are going to need a positive feedback mechanism to bring you farther away from that state of sameness so that you can undergo childbirth, right? So that's exactly what happens. During childbirth, the baby will move down the birth canal. As the baby moves down the cervix into the birth canal, it's going to stimulate a release of hormones that are going to cause contractions, okay? As the uterus contracts, that's going to push the baby even farther down the birth control, releasing more hormones, causing even more contractions, more frequent and more intense contractions. And again, this cycle will continue until the baby again is expelled. Okay, well that sounds so bad when I say it like that, like expelled. But again, when the baby gets its final eviction notice, right, is when this positive feedback cycle stops. And so it makes sense that childbirth is a case where we would want positive feedback because, again, you don't want to maintain pregnancy forever. Another case where you're going to see positive feedback, but short term. So you're going to see, look at this right here is where the positive feedback cycle is going to be broken. So it's short term, but platelet plug formation. For a short time, it's going to be a positive feedback loop. So what's going to happen is you get a break or tear that occurs in your blood vessel wall. And that's going to initiate this positive feedback cycle. So the platelets are going to come in and move in and adhere to that site. So adhere to this site of damage on that blood vessel wall. And then what that's going to do is it's going to release chemicals that are going to attract even more platelets. And then as the platelets adhere to that site, they're going to release chemicals going to contract even more platelets, bringing even more platelets in, okay? And so obviously this is a case where we, again, want a positive feedback cycle because we don't want our state of sameness to be this tear in our blood vessel. We want that to get fixed. So again, we're going to initiate this positive feedback cycle until that platelet plug is completely formed and it blocks off that blood vessel, right, from releasing any blood into the tissue surrounding tissue, okay? And then when that platelet plug is formed, that feedback cycle ends, okay? So that's another example of a positive feedback cycle. Okay, so again, these are just some quick examples, positive or negative feedback. A female becomes amenorrheic, stops her menstrual cycle when her body is deprived of food. Again, focus on her energy source. So if her body is already deprived of food, okay, her energy stores are low. If she were to menstruate, her energy stores would be even lower. So the body stops that menstrual cycle to help bring her energy stores back to homeostasis. So again, this is negative feedback. We're trying to get back to homeostasis. A runner breathes more heavily when they're exercising, okay? So focus on the oxygen content in the blood. So think about it. As the runner is, again, running, their muscles are contracting. Their muscles need more oxygen. So the blood oxygen level starts to dip as their muscles are using that oxygen, okay? So they're going to breathe more heavily to bring in more oxygen into the blood to help bring back up their oxygen levels to homeostasis. So again, negative feedback because we're trying to get back to homeostasis here. And then this is just kind of a silly example, but it's because there's not very many examples of negative feedback or positive feedback in the body, sorry. So again, this is negative feedback, negative feedback. This is the only example of positive feedback here. It's not my favorite. Again, lower unemployment causes increased labor costs, which raises the prices on goods, causing inflation, which causes wages to increase more, which leads to more increased inflation. So this is just an example of positive feedback where you're getting, again, that response brings you farther away from homeostasis. But again, not my favorite example. It's one that we have here. But obviously, my favorite examples of positive feedback, the ones I would use on an exam, will be childbirth, labor, as well as platelet plug formation. Okay. So again, homeostatic imbalance. So anytime, again, homeostasis is disturbed, this can oftentimes increase our risk of disease, and it will oftentimes contribute to changes that we associate with aging, okay? So again, getting us away from that homeostasis. So control systems as we age actually become less efficient, which is one of the reasons why these control systems for homeostasis, which is one of the reasons why we age. Now, if negative feedback mechanisms get overwhelmed, right, then destructive positive feedback mechanisms might take over. And this can lead to things like heart failure and, again, death. So again, negative feedback is our primary goal to bring us back to homeostasis. Disease, again, is a more specific term that we talk about, again, for an illness that's characterized by certain signs and symptoms. So this is more kind of our clinical application of what is a disease and what are these signs and symptoms. So anytime that we have a type of illness or disease, usually, again, you're going to look for these certain signs and symptoms. Signs are usually objective changes that clinicians can actually see, observe, and measure, okay? So you can see a rash, you can measure a fever or your change in blood pressure, okay? That would be a sign. Now, symptoms are more subjective changes in body functions that, again, are not always apparent they can't be measured by the clinician or observer. So example, again, a headache. We can't measure your headache. Sometimes we can do an MRI and see the changes in pressure, but in blood pressure in the brain, but we can't actually measure a headache or see a headache or see nausea, okay? So those are examples of symptoms. So I'm going to stop here and I'll do basic anatomical terminology, which is the last little bit of this lecture, in a second recording here.